Thank you very much, James, and good evening, everyone. It's a great privilege to give a speech in such a beautiful surroundings. I'm told that this is actually where Alexander Graham Bell demonstrated the telephone and Marconi the radio. And I can't promise such great technological revolution today, but I do want to talk about revolution in the energy industry. As you saw from the video earlier, the energy sector has been through some exhilarating and challenging times. From the discovery of North Sea oil and gas, the liberalization of the energy markets, we've seen remarkable change in a few decades. And indeed, when I first joined the energy industry in 1981, gas and electricity were nationalized industries, North Sea production was booming, and the UK was a big exporter of energy. Worries about man's impact on the environment were restricted to a few far-sighted academics and environmentalists. And the name British Gas, of course, accurately summed up what that publicly owned entity did. Life is very different today. The energy industry is in private hands, operating in a competitive sector. While the demise of North Sea oil has been rather overdone, we now import 40% of our gas. Climate change is the most serious threat to our way of life. And British Gas is part of Centrica, now with major interests in the UK and overseas, and nuclear and wind energy. The consumer and the country have benefited. We often forget that we have the cheapest energy in Europe, and competition has created new products, services, and innovation. The changes we've seen have been fundamental, but the point I want to make tonight is that I passionately believe that the transformation that we need to see in our industry over the next 10 years, let alone the next 20, will be even greater still. If we, and here we means our industry, the government, opinion formers, and consumers, are to overcome the challenges ahead, we need a fundamental change of mindset. And I fear we are not there yet. It's easy to see why. The decisions are difficult. The temptation to stall is understandable, but the consequences of failure could be little short of catastrophic. We cannot let the lights go out. Serious climate change must be averted through action now, and energy costs must be managed. We cannot sit on our hands waiting for one of us to do something before the other does, blaming each other for inaction. We need to show leadership. I recognize that in some respects, my industry has in the past fallen short, particularly in our transparency and engagement with customers. But energy companies, not least Centrica, have a major responsibility to step up. So tonight, I want to make my contribution. I want to set out how, if we are bold and work together, we can meet the challenges. How, within this decade, we can cut the carbon footprint of the average household in Britain by over a third. Now, this is not going to be easy. We need to do so while meeting our primary responsibility of providing power to our economy and homes. Yet Britain's power plants are aging. Many will reach the end of their lives by 2016. In our industry's terms, that's just around the corner. Investment in new capacity is essential, but it's by no means yet assured. And this challenge is compounded by the need to cut carbon emissions and keep our energy affordable. Ladies and gentlemen, achieving this means nothing less than turning the traditional energy business model on its head. It means a company like British Gas must be as much about energy saving as it is about energy supply. And I believe this transformation is possible, that industry can step up to the mark, but we can't do it alone. We need the right framework in which to operate. 20 years ago, the country had the vision to liberalise the energy market. We now need to find the same vision to decarbonise it. And the customer must move from wanting action to tackle climate change to understanding that they must be part of the solution and recognise too that there is a cost. So what are the steps to meeting this immense challenge? First, decarbonising the power sector is crucial. Cleaner electricity is not only vital in itself, but it's a stepping stone to decarbonising other sectors, particularly heating and transport. Decarbonising electricity, for example, paves the way for the electric vehicle. That's why, if we're to meet our 2050 commitment to reduce carbon emissions by 80% and fulfill our obligations to future generations, the power sector needs to be largely decarbonised by the 2030s. Now, some figures explain why this isn't going to be easy. Currently, on average, to generate a kilowatt hour, that's enough to run a cycle on your washing machine, we emit just over 500 grams of carbon dioxide. But by the 2030s, this needs to have come down by half, and then halve again. This is a tough task, and I understand there is some skepticism, but I believe that with the right market reforms, it can be achieved. As an example, 2 nuclear power stations, almost 5 times as much wind power as now, a trial carbon capture plant, all up and running, which is perfectly possible within the next 10 years, can cut power sector emissions by over 20% in a decade. And as more nuclear, renewables, and in time, carbon capture and storage technologies come on stream in the following decade, we will be on course for 2050. Decarbonising the power sector to this tight timetable is possible, but by no means assured. We need decisions and investments now, and this is simply not happening at the scale and speed required. We need to get the planning right to prevent unnecessary delays while giving communities a real voice. We need as well to rethink the market framework for the new era and challenges. And we need to do so while making sure we keep the benefits of the existing system. For the current market arrangements have served us well. The UK has enjoyed unparalleled security of supply. Privatisation has delivered the investments needed. Customers enjoy energy costs amongst the lowest in Europe. The forces of the liberalised market brought prices down. Now they need to be captured to bring carbon down. We need to encourage low-carbon capacity, not just the lowest short-run marginal cost. This means a strong price on carbon, so the polluter pays. This is necessary, but not sufficient. In addition, the market will need to be reconstructed to reward all forms of low-carbon energy, firm ones that provide baseload power and flexible generation to back up intermittent wind power. The framework must not be biased towards one particular fuel mix, and as Churchill observed, the future of energy security lies in energy diversity. We need a balance. It's obvious to me, however, that nuclear power fulfills many of the requirements we've set, a proven technology that can provide low-carbon energy at a cost well below that of renewables. Nuclear has a vital role to play in the UK's clean energy future. Through our joint venture with EDF, we plan to see the power flowing from the first of a new fleet of nuclear power stations at Hinkley by 2018. But this will only happen if we have the necessary carbon price and the market mechanisms in place. Centrica also has an offshore wind project of over 1 gigawatt. That's the equivalent of another nuclear power station awaiting consent. But again, the regime beyond 2014 needs clarity for investors to move forward. And you won't be surprised to hear that I also believe gas must be part of this mix, not least as a bridging fuel to the low-carbon future. Indeed, in comparison to coal and oil, it is low carbon. If all the coal-fired stations in the UK were switched to gas, we could cut emissions of the power sector by 1/3. And gas provides the flexibility we need to back up wind generation. As carbon capture and storage technologies emerge, they could be extended to gas-fired power stations, enabling an even greater role for gas in our generation mix. But gas supplies are undergoing their own transformation. As our domestic supplies continue to decline, we need to maximize the UK's reserves. We also have to continue to build partnerships overseas to guarantee gas supplies to the UK. So, ladies and gentlemen, these challenges are big. The government should be commended for launching the energy market reform, but the timetable is tight and there is no room for slippage. But if we do get the market framework right, and crucially the planning system as well, I believe the energy sector can provide the clean power we need. Decarbonising our power supply will get us a long way towards cutting carbon emissions, but it's not enough. We need to look closer to home. Britain's households are responsible for over a quarter of the UK's CO2 emissions. Cleaner electricity can go some way towards cutting this, but it won't make a difference to the gas we use to heat our homes and cook our meals. We're already addressing domestic emissions by improving the energy efficiency of new homes with sharply improved building standards. But we can't ignore the existing housing stock. 2/3 of homes today will still be lived in 2050. For most of us, today's home is the home of the future. Yet their energy efficiency is amongst the worst in Europe. There are still over 4 million inefficient boilers in the UK. 6 million homes are without cavity wall insulation. 7 million without proper loft insulation. Just putting this right could cut the carbon footprint of the average British home by 20%. We haven't done enough, and here again, I mean industry and government, to explain the cost-benefit of energy savings to families. Nor have we done enough to ease their fears that they can't afford to pay the upfront costs. But there is real hope that this is changing. The coalition government's proposed Green Deal has the potential to transform Britain's housing stock. By removing the upfront costs of energy efficiency improvements, it can help save money, reduce carbon, and help energy security. The government is to be commended for its vision. What's needed now is to see the legislation in place and the scheme up and running as quickly as possible. And if it is truly to transform our homes, it needs to capture all the technologies available, from insulation through to microgeneration. It's a complex policy area requiring new legislation and careful development of the right financing structures. It must also be developed in partnership with the companies who will deliver it and the consumers who will use it. And we're committed to setting a lead. Today, I'm announcing a £30 million package for British Gas to go early on the Green Deal. This will help our customers make their homes energy efficient now. And to help the government get the full scheme right, I can also promise that we will share what works and also any teething problems for the benefit of all. Energy efficiency measures are vital, but we also need to help customers manage the energy they use in a smarter way. Smart meters provide instant accessible information on energy use through a display, on your laptop, and even through your phone. They tell you when appliances have been left on, what energy is being used, as well as pointing to the best tariff for a household to be on. Soon, meters, and this is already happening for our North American customers, will be able to tell your dishwasher the cheapest time of day to switch itself on, so your plates are clean in the morning, having taken advantage of the lowest tariff. Greater energy awareness will lead to smarter energy management and cut bills immediately. The coalition government will want to see smart meters rolled out within a decade. We share this ambition. And just as we're going early on the Green Deal, we're taking the lead on smart meters. We've already installed over 100,000, and by the end of 2012, we aim to have installed 2 million smart meters. And again, we're going to share what we learn across the industry and with government. We'll do our part. Government must maintain the momentum and ensure that every home benefits from this revolutionary technology as soon as possible. Smart meters are an end in themselves, but they're also a means. They're the building blocks for the smart grid, and they can help homes be rewarded for generating their own power. Microgeneration brings a new meaning to the phrase power to the people. South-facing roofs catching the power of the sun, boilers that use their waste heat to generate power, pumps that gather the heat from the ground to warm the home. But if they're to help deliver the revolution required, we need government to continue to support them through incentives. Ladies and gentlemen, on their own, all these measures are significant, but taken together, they can deliver the transformation we need, cutting the average carbon footprint for the home by 20%. And if we add this to the saving achieved by decarbonizing electricity, the footprint for the average home is cut by over a third. Now, the opportunity for British business to save energy and lower costs is just as important, not only providing a big boost for our productivity, but it's also a huge opportunity for new green industries and jobs. But all this needs, as I've said, a change of mindset and a transformation in our business model, one geared around helping customers manage their energy, not just use it. This requires nothing short of a revolution in our industry. Now, some might be skeptical about whether it can be achieved, but other industries have done it. Today's telecoms and media industries are unrecognizable from 2 decades ago. It means new names will enter the market. Existing companies like ours will have to change to survive. I relish the challenge. British Gas is developing the capability not just to survive, but to thrive. We are already the largest supplier of energy efficiency in the UK and one of the largest installers of solar panels. And we have a 9,500 strong team of engineers, a workforce poised to support the green revolution. Within a few years, we want energy services to be just as big a part of British Gas as energy supply. But customers need to be encouraged to play their part. Their roofs, lofts, walls, and gardens must become part of the low-carbon world, and we need to help them use the information from their smart meters to cut their energy consumption and their bills. And government and industry also have a responsibility to explain to them that the move to a low-carbon economy won't be cost-free. The estimated cost of new investment required in the energy sector over the next decade is some £200 billion to keep the lights on and to meet our carbon targets. And this is a daunting sum. It places an immense responsibility on our industry. With public finances tight, we understand that it's up to us to find the funding from our own balance sheets or with our partners. But there's a need for a reality check, which is often missing. Although it will be up to companies and their shareholders to supply the funding, the costs will ultimately have to be recovered through customers' bills. And we need to be honest and transparent with customers about the potential costs ahead. The energy bill cannot be a proxy for funding environmental and social policy without the customer understanding and fully supporting this. Putting aside what happens to the commodity prices, the government estimates that by 2020, the extra cost of decarbonizing our energy supply could, without offsetting action, add to some £250 to the average annual household bill. The challenge is to limit this increase through greater energy efficiency, to reduce consumption and therefore the customer's bill. But such savings are not a given. It requires exactly the ingredients I've outlined: the right government framework, companies delivering, customers engaging, perhaps the big society in action. We have to recognize, too, that these environmental levies are potentially regressive, and we must keep vulnerable customers front of mind. Companies' social tariffs and state benefits can go a long way to helping people meet the costs of their energy, and British Gas will continue to lead in this area, helping some 500,000 vulnerable customers. But these benefits do have to be well targeted, unlike the winter fuel payment, where over £2 billion of the nearly £3 billion spent annually goes to people who do not live in fuel poverty. Ultimately, energy efficiency is the most sustainable way to help communities meet their energy bills. We and the rest of industry are already working in this area, but we're only scratching the surface, and we've learned that working with local authorities and local housing associations is the key. In Dumfries and Galloway, for example, British Gas is working with the local housing partnership to help tenants living in very low energy efficiency homes. We're offering insulation, heating systems, and renewable technologies, targeting help where it's most needed in a comprehensive way. We're also training up local staff to install these measures, building skills and creating local employment. And this is one of many examples around the country. What this demonstrates is that although delivering the £200 billion of investment will be challenging, there's a triple dividend of lower carbon, greater energy security, and new jobs and skills. For example, last year, Centrica alone announced that we are creating 3,200 new jobs in energy efficiency, smart meters, and renewables, providing the new green jobs to help our economy grow and developing the new technologies, skills, and industries to drive Britain's future prosperity. So there's no shortage of challenges ahead, and plenty for us to discuss tonight. I hope I've made clear that our ambition is for a secure, low-carbon and affordable energy supply, but it's by no means inevitable. Achieving this goal requires us to work together and urgently to put the right building blocks in place. Our future energy system must look radically different from today. A mix of low-carbon power generation, providing secure, reliable electricity, with the UK taking a leadership position in tackling climate change. Homes and consumers that use energy more efficiently and in smarter ways, and where possible, generate their own. Market arrangements that maintain affordability with measures in place to ensure that most vulnerable customers are supported. And energy efficiency being as important to energy companies as supply. Indeed, as I see it, the old utility business model is dead. Ladies and gentlemen, 200 years ago, an Act of Parliament incorporated the Gas and Light Company, and in this company lay the origins of municipal gas companies, the Gas Board, the gas network companies, and ultimately British Gas and Centrica. It's my belief that the energy company model we know today will, within this decade, seem just as much a thing of the past as the Gas, Light and Coke Company. From where I stand, I can already see it happening. The prize we're aiming for is to cut the average carbon footprint of Britain's homes by over a third within 10 years, through decarbonising power and improving energy efficiency. But for industry to deliver, we need to raise our game. We also need the active involvement and support of government, regulators, and customers. This has always been an exciting industry, and it's going to become more exciting still. For we have to do nothing less than develop a new business model for a new low-carbon world. Thank you very much.
Sam, thank you very much indeed. I'm not sure whether I'm supposed to do this at this stage, but I would like to thank you in all seriousness for an incredibly impressive speech. I know that often you find yourselves in situations where businessmen address the broader issues of industry and duck the very difficult issues. Thank you for addressing this issue with quite such candour and quite such clarity, and it is very exciting for those of us who watch this issue with great interest to see you not only challenging government, the public, but also, most importantly, your fellow companies and Centrica itself. One of the things, of course, that's most interesting about that is that some companies duck the issue altogether. I think that our next speaker, Lord Turner, has made it impossible for them to do so with a good conscience. I welcome Lord Turner, the Chairman of the Committee on Climate Change, to the stage.
Thank you, James, and good evening, everybody. I'm very glad to be here for Sam's launch of what is a very clear and strong and important statement from Centrica of their determination to deal with these issues and a very clear programme of the contribution that they are going to make to building a low-carbon economy. It's obvious that Parliament can legislate and set the targets for what we want to achieve in terms of reduction of emissions. Government can set policies and incentives, but an awful lot of what has to happen is either going to be individuals in their homes or it's going to be companies through the investment and the management skills that they bring to bear. And so it is vitally important that in this whole challenge of building a low-carbon economy, there is a very close working relationship between government and companies, but particularly, of course, the energy companies themselves. And that is why I'm very glad to be here. Now, I've been asked to respond to what Sam has said and do it from the perspective of the Climate Change Committee. How do we see the issues that Sam has talked about? Well, the answer is we see them in very, very similar terms. We see that electricity decarbonisation is absolutely fundamental to a low-carbon economy, and that energy efficiency, particularly in the use of heat, the reduction of the number of kilowatt hours of heat that we use, is absolutely fundamental as well. Now, the Climate Change Committee's role is to recommend to government the targets, the carbon budgets that we legislate and we commit to advise on the steps needed to meet those budgets, and then to monitor year by year whether we are actually achieving the progress set out in the budgets which a Parliament has legislated. And we are, in that process, we're a very fact-driven organisation. If you've ever read our reports, they are full of tables, they are full of graphs. So I'd like to give you a few facts which help illustrate what we see as the challenge. UK emissions, 2009, about 570 million tonnes CO2 and other greenhouse gases. Parliament has legislated a commitment to get that down to something in the range of 150 million tonnes, 2.2 tonnes per capita, by 2050. And that is a legal commitment of the UK government, and that is what we believe is a responsible commitment as part of a global strategy of dealing with climate change. Within that, the 480 million tonnes of CO2 will have to come down to something like 130 million tonnes by 2050. And we'll have to get them, we can't leave it all till the sort of last 5 years and in a rush make it up then. We'll have to get that 480 down to something like 360 by 2020. And in both the long-term path to 2050 and the path to 2020, electricity and gas use in homes and indeed in commercial buildings and in the public sector is absolutely fundamental. Electricity produces about 150 million tonnes of CO2 emissions per year in 2009, down a lot on 2008, but before we pat ourselves on the back about that wonderful achievement, the quickest way to produce a fall in emissions is to have a whacking great recession. So one of our jobs is to tell Parliament, tell government not to pat themselves on the back about the wonderful success of their policies, and to be able to separate the underlying trend from the recessionary impact. But 150 million tonnes on the electricity side, and about 135 million tonnes from direct emissions, primarily gas, used in residential houses, commercial buildings, etc. So that's 285 million, and that's going to have to come back down, probably to below 50 million tonnes by 2050. Because in that 150 million tonnes that we need to get the total to by 2050, there's some things which are very, very difficult to reduce. Reducing agricultural emissions is very difficult. Reducing aviation emissions is very difficult. And that means that there are other sectors of the economy that we're going to have to really decarbonise even more to make up for the difficulties of fully decarbonising those. Now, within that, electricity decarbonisation is really important. Electricity today, about 500 grams per kilowatt hour that we consume, half a kilogram per kilowatt hour, multiplied by about 300 billion kilowatt hours, 300 terawatt hours, and that's where the 150 million tonnes come from. And on the Climate Change Committee, we believe that we've got to get that 500 grams per kilowatt hour down to about 300 grams per kilowatt hour by 2020, and to below, and probably well below, 100 grams per kilowatt hour, maybe below 50 grams per kilowatt hour. We'll be advising this in December when we produce our 4th budget report, looking at the 2020s, but a really low figure by 2030. And that is crucial, because when we decarbonize electricity, and as Sam has already said it, we don't just take out the 150 million or most of the 150 million tons which electricity generates today. We create low-carbon electricity which we can then apply to the electrification of surface transport, cars and vans in particular, and increasingly to domestic heating, in particular by ground and air source heat pumps. And indeed, the long-term future certainly involves much lower grams per kilowatt hour of electricity, but almost certainly significantly higher electricity consumption in 2050 than today. Indeed, we could see electricity consumption, despite all the efforts we will need on energy efficiency, actually going up to, say, 500 terawatt hours by 2050. So we have got to decarbonize electricity, and indeed we've almost got to decarbonize it totally, and Sam said this, by about the 2030s. The debate is not whether we're going to do it, it's exactly when we start getting down to 50 or 40 or 30 or 20 grams per kilowatt hour. There are 3 main technologies which we have to deploy to get there. There are a suite of renewables, primarily at the moment wind, and we believe that wind has an important role to play, and we are now rolling it out at an aggressive pace and believe we will need to keep doing that in the 2020s. Nuclear, we also believe, is important. We should have new nuclear power plants working by 2020, and we believe we will then have to be opening 1 or 2 new nuclear power plants continually every year throughout the 2020s to have a mix that meets these requirements. And we also need carbon capture and storage. And we certainly need it if there is going to be any fossil fuel at all in the mix. Coal, 600 to 700 grams per kilowatt hour. Well, it's pretty obvious you can't have much of that in the mix and end up with an average of, say, 50 grams per kilowatt hour. And we're absolutely clear that unabated coal without carbon capture and storage, really has to be out of the system by 2020 and not playing a role in the 2020s. But we are going to have to make carbon capture and storage work even on gas. Yes, gas is much better than coal, say 300 grams per kilowatt hour, not 600 grams per kilowatt hour, but still, if we've got to get the total down to 50 or 20 grams, then we are going to have to either be using unabated gas as a very small part of the mix, just as a peak load element, with really the vast majority coming from nuclear or renewables, or we're going to have to CCS gas as well. So we think there are the technologies available. We think this is doable. We think it is doable at a cost which, as Sam said, is not trivial, and we need to be honest with people about that, but it is still affordable and small, as Nick Stern pointed out, as a percentage of GDP within the total context of national income. But we do need to deploy these technologies and get there. The role of government is to set the appropriate incentives. And one of the things that we have very strongly argued and discussed with the power companies and with Ofgem is that the existing electricity structure, the set of tools that we have to try and incentivize moving to a low-carbon economy, the way that we work the electricity market, is simply not designed for the low-carbon world. We put in place, back in the 1990s, a competitive market which fundamentally requires that people invest in the expectation of selling wholesale electricity in the future at a volatile and fluctuating half-hour by half-hour price for electricity. What that means is that a lot of money you make out of the peak periods of electricity, and it means that when you think about investing in a low-carbon source, your economics depend upon your expectations of the future price of electricity, which are fluctuating and might fluctuate further in the future as we have more and more of the grid being high capital investment, zero marginal cost. You've got a fluctuating price of electricity, you've got a fluctuating price of gas, you've got a fluctuating price of carbon. And we came to the belief that the combination of these 3 fluctuating prices and expectations of them was just creating so much risk that it is not going to pull through the low-carbon commitments we need. So we believe that we need fundamental reform, which is now planned, to the electricity market through some combination of creating a carbon price, which is much more predictable. That requires some sort of underpin within the European EU ETS, or changes to the electricity market, which are providing low-carbon sources of electricity with some combination of either certain prices or certain quantity offtakes or certain payments for putting the capacity in place. But the key message is the existing market, which was put in place to achieve very specific aims back in the 1990s to support the dash for gas, is not fit for purpose and needs to be changed. So we need to drive decarbonisation of electricity, and to do that we need to change some of the market instruments, the market design, to create the right incentives. We also need, as Sam has said, to drive energy efficiency improvements. There are lots of opportunities in homes, but also in commercial buildings and in the public sector to improve energy efficiency in ways which, far from costing the home or the small business money, at least in theory, are zero cost. For those of you who know these wonderful cost curves that McKinsey and other people produce, they are at the negative cost per tonne of carbon bit of the cost curve. Now, of course, to free market, rational expectation, efficient market economists, this cannot possibly be the case. If it is the case that there is a negative cost opportunity, then of course it would already have been seized. Of course, a pure free market economist is the sort of person who walks down the street, he sees a £50 note on the pavement, he doesn't pick up the £50 note because he knows it isn't there, because if it was there, someone would have picked it up already. But why haven't these £50 notes been picked up? Well, one of the most important things is that there are hidden costs, there are hassle costs. We all know that there are things we can do to make our houses more energy efficient, but there's lots of other things we do in life and we never get round to making the phone call, or we're worried that when we do make the phone call, it'll be 10 different phone calls to 10 different people. We're worried that it'll be disruptive. One of the most important things we've got to do in that area is create devices that make it easy for people. One-stop shops, processes where you can go, where you can get analysis of your house's energy efficiency, where you can sign a check or perhaps get help, a subsidy help, but some of the most important things here are removing the hassle rather than necessarily removing the cost. And that is where the good design of close working relationships between the power company and the gas suppliers and government is absolutely important, and the Green New Deal, that is the challenge there. Finally, to say, Sam mentioned the issue of smart meters, and this, I think, is an incredibly important technology. There is a display downstairs, which I've just been looking at with Sam, of what the next generation of smart meters that go in can be achieved. I already have in my kitchen one of those instantaneous display things. It's very straightforward, doesn't give you a historic record, not linked through to the time of day tariffs, but already has empowered me to drive my family mad by saying, why the hell is 1 kilowatt going on here? I can't see anything on. Who's left the lights on throughout it? And I know that my family are greatly looking forward, when I have one of Sam's more sophisticated remote ones, that I will be able to phone in from anywhere in the world and say, why are we running at 1 kilowatt? Can you please switch that off? But what that illustrates, I think, is that we do have the technological capabilities to achieve the change that we need. But in order to do that, we need a careful alliance of the appropriate public policies, the involvement of individuals. And one of the great things about smart meters is it does automatically make people think. I mean, in business, we all know what gets measured gets managed. Well, that's true in households as well. It simply brings things to people's attention they never thought of before. We need an alliance, a coordination, a cooperation between government, between the consumer, and also between companies, crucially important, and above all, energy companies, which is why I'm very glad to have been here today to respond to Sam's speech. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the moment where we open things up for a proper conversation. Someone with a particularly wicked sense of humour put me in charge of timekeeping. So I'd like to try and keep their faith in me. We are going to end at 7:45 and then, as you know, go down and I hope have a drink and continue this conversation. What we'd like to do is take 2 or 3 questions at a time, either for Sam Laidlaw or for Adair Turner. Please, would you just say who you are and where you're from, and ideally a question, not a huge speech.
Where are the critical bottlenecks in this? Who is holding up change and what can be done about it?
Thank you. There's a gentleman over here on the right.
Thank you. My question relates to, well, my name's Simon Goldsmith from Principal Sustainability. What do you think is the biggest challenge in actually helping us transform into a low-carbon economy? Is it the inability to prove, in terms of proven technology or behaviour change or lack of capital investment or whatever? Could you please clarify or give me what you think the biggest challenge would be?
Okay, terrific. Thank you. There's a gentleman here in the middle.
Nick, maybe from E3G, you talked a little bit about business model change, and I think the challenge is, certainly we think the business model change is really important. Could you expand a little bit on what you see some of the models that might emerge, some of the new entrants that might emerge, and what can government in market reform do to encourage new entrants and new business models to emerge?
Should we start with that? You said something very striking, Sam, about the utility model being dead.
Yeah.
What is the new model?
Well, I think the new model, which is around actually helping customers manage their energy bills rather than just maximizing the amount of therms and kilowatt hours that you sell, is a big shift. And in some cases, when you talk about the sort of details of this, in some cases it will be renting appliances, as for instance we're doing already with, we have a program called Rent a Roof, where effectively customers make their roofs available. We put solar panels on the roof. We recover the feed-in tariff. The customer recovers the low-carbon electricity. And actually there is zero cost to them, and yet we get a return through the feed-in tariff off the solar panel. So that's one very different model than, if you like, just selling them the technology and the customer has to bear the upfront cost. So I think that's an example, but actually we can also see, I think, when we get into the world of microgeneration and we get beyond the sort of current initial period of feed-in tariffs and the smart meters, customers are actually starting to sell electricity back to the grid at different times of day and charging their electric vehicles. The whole relationship between the energy supplier and the customer is going to be a very different one, where we will be the customer some of the time rather than being the supplier.
Adair, do you want to deal with this question about the biggest challenge?
Well, the biggest challenge and the bottlenecks, I think, go together. And I suggested it, I think, in the words I said. I think on the electricity decarbonisation side, I think I would identify 2 potential bottlenecks, blocks that we have to deal with. One of which is the structure of incentives which comes from the carbon price and the electricity market design and incentives out of that, which I think there is work to be done on getting that set of incentives right. And the crucial thing is to think about what are the risks that investors in low carbon technology face, and where is it possible for government, really at no cost to itself, to de-risk what is going on by creating an environment where a lot of the risks on either the quantity or prices are taken away. There are some risks we should never take away from companies. They have to be the people. If you're going to build a nuclear power station, then the cost management of that's got to reside with the company. Nobody should have the idea that we're going to take that risk back, but there are other things that we can do to de-risk this. And if we do that, I think we will end up we will end up with a cheaper cost of this than if we place all of the risks of the existing very complicated electricity market design and a fluctuating carbon, gas and electricity price, all unmanageable by the low carbon investor. That's one. The other thing I would say on electricity is planning. I mean, the fact is, that if we want low carbon electricity, and if we want to do it in non-fossil fuel fashion, and we have got to do that because we can't rely entirely on carbon capture and storage. It's not yet a proven technology. It's only been illustrated at plant level. We've got to get it at demonstration level. So we've got to have real low carbon technology rather than carbon storage technology. That fundamentally means renewables or it means nuclear. And yet the simple fact is that there are a group of people ready to devote their life to opposing planning applications for windmills, and another group of people willing to devote their life to opposing planning applications for nuclear power plants. And frankly, if we are going to decarbonise the electricity grid, while respecting people's right to bring those arguments forward, we have got to have mechanisms of driving these things through the planning process at a reasonable pace, or we will simply not build this stuff fast enough. I think in relation to energy efficiency, as I've said, I think the biggest challenge is overcoming the hassle factor. I mean, I think there are lots of people who, if you could simply say, this is what you have to do to make your house more energy efficient, the cost will be X, Y, Z, please sign a check and it'll magically happen, they do it tomorrow. Not all people can do that. Some of them do require, lower income people require subsidy help to do it, but lots of middle and higher income people would be willing to do that. It's just how do we make it easy enough for them to do that? And that is where new business designs are really, really important.
Sam, do you want to just, you addressed the issue of carbon price and planning in your speech, but I think people would be interested to know what you think about the issue of these bottlenecks.
No, I think Adair is absolutely right. Those are the two biggest ones in bringing new sources of low carbon energy on supply and making the investment decisions are, we need the carbon price. We need to understand, I think, what the carbon price is going to be by the time the investment comes on stream. And I think that means actually we have to transition into it too over a number of years, because I think that gives investors the confidence that something is definitely happening on carbon price. And then I think when it comes to the electricity market reform, which the government are looking at and recognize there is a problem, I think Adair is absolutely right. We need some form of mechanism that is going to reward all low carbon forms of generation in a world where we will have more volatility simply because we have more intermittency of power from all these wind farms that are being built, and will therefore have to provide some underpinning. But I absolutely agree with Adair that we shouldn't go back to a regulated world where investors removed from the construction risk, because I think at the end of the day you end up with a very high cost to the consumer if you go that route.
No, thank you. Okay, there's a lady here on the right, and then a gentleman over there.
Hi, this is Abigail Burridge from the Local Government Association. I'm sure you'd like me to say something about planning, but I'm not going to. I'm going to ask about energy from waste. Government's been talking to us a lot about energy from waste, anaerobic digestion, and combined heat and power. And I was just wondering if you saw that as part of the energy mix and a viable opportunity for private sector investment.
Is there a gentleman in the corner there?
Good evening. My name's Alistair Buchanan at Ofgem. Much taken by Sam's comments about the concept of frameworks, and two quick questions that follow from that. Is the current EU framework giving you an even playing field, or do you worry about the next missive from Brussels? And secondly, given the very major challenges you've outlined, would it help you to have a new legal framework that had a Cadbury law for utility and energy companies?
Sorry, I didn't hear that. Could you just say that again?
Given your substantial challenges, would it be useful for you to have a new legal framework that had a Cadbury law for utility energy companies?
Before we go on, Sam, do you want to deal with Alistair Buchanan's questions?
First question was around, do we worry about, and are we impeded by more sort of directives from Brussels? I don't honestly think we are. I think that if we are to provide a floor on the carbon price, the only issue there is, can we do that in a way that is compliant with the EU legislation, and that could potentially be an issue. But as I understand it, we found a solution to that. The government's found a solution to that problem. So, I think we actually as a company have been advocates of moving the EU carbon reduction target up from 20% to 30%, and I think that actually in this area we're not impeded by a lot of directives from Brussels. I think sort of your second question, I think, was around should the capital structure of energy companies be protected in some way? I think actually at the end of the day this is a business where we've got some companies with very large balance sheets relative to a lot of other businesses, and the best protection I think for any company is to perform well, to provide good customer service, and to therefore have a strong share price, and I wouldn't advocate anything special for energy companies.
Dave, you want to?
Well, I think just on the EU ETS within the European context, just to reinforce what Sam says, we are strong supporters of the Europe moving from a 20% reduction target to a 30% reduction target and to tightening the EU ETS. I think we have a problem within the European emission trading scheme at the moment, that because of the recession, which has impacted emissions across Europe, this is a far softer tool than had previously been envisaged when the targets were set. And we really have to tighten it. But I do think we need also to create and underpin some certainty of the future minimum price within the EU ETS, or a supplement to it that achieves the same effect. And this is an interesting piece of theory. If you go back to Nick Stern's study of the economics of climate change, where there is a discussion, as there's always been, of whether the best way to use market instruments is to have a fixed price of carbon, which you, as it were, legislate, or to have a fixed quantity limit, and then the price is a fluctuating price within that. I think there is a very good argument for saying that the optimal policy mix is a cap which produces a fluctuating price with a minimum floor for that fluctuating price, which gives you the certainty that you will drive the quantities down because you've got an absolute cap, but the certainty about the future price of carbon set out in advance. And I think that is a crucially important part of the policy framework. And like Sam, I think we are able in Britain to move ahead and do that even if the rest of Europe isn't, though it would be best if we could get a pan-European agreement for this minimum and steadily rising carbon price.
Thank you. We're going to come to a question about energy waste, but before we do that, I'd just like to ask Alistair Buchanan, what are your answers to those two questions? Are you worried about uncertainty in the EU framework, and do you think we need a new legal framework for energy companies?
I think the third directive was a step forward. It focused more, I believe, on the institutional side of regulation in particular, also focusing on unbundling within the network companies. There is talk already about the need for a fourth directive to promote what we've always regarded in Britain as vital if markets are going to work, which is high-quality, transparent information. And I still believe that there are necessary steps to be made there. With regard to your second question, when the Cadbury law was recommended by some members of the previous government, I gulped to see that Ofgem and regulators were expected to have a role in this. My guess is that competition authorities are always the best place to go in such situations, and indeed that is what happens in the current environment.
Thank you very much. Could we just answer the question about energy waste? Sam,
yes, I mean, I think there's a lot of potential in energy waste, and I'm glad you raised it. I mean, in many different forms. From we've got, by way of example, a project actually which should come on stream next week, which is actually using biomethane from sewage works and putting the methane back into the grid. And if this is successful, we think that we can scale it up and apply it in a number of other locations across the UK, which isn't going to be a massive part of our gas consumption, but could potentially be up to 10% of gas consumption when you look at all the different forms of biomethane that could go into the grid. And then you've got biomass heating is something that clearly I think is very important if we are to achieve the climate change targets, we can only get so far from renewables. So the renewable heat incentive, which is due to come in next April, I think is very important to actually, and that will enable air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, solar thermal, and a whole range of domestic technologies, as well as larger scale projects, which are going to be very important as well.
Thank you. There's a gentleman over here, and there's a lady up at the back. She's got her hand up there. So.
Hello, Peter Bance from Ceres Power. This is a question for Sam. I know we know each other a little bit. Less about big boys' toys and lots of upstream stuff, which understandably dominates a lot of energy discussion. This is more about consumers and the demand side. To be slightly provocative, I would suggest that most consumers don't know much and don't care at all about energy. It's this kind of invisible, nearly free good. It's always there for the good reasons you mentioned. We've been lulled into this kind of near sleepy state. It's there, it's cheap, etc. I've read a whole bunch of really negative stuff. What mechanisms, what tools does your company or others plan to use to wake people up? Technological, financial, social, how do you get people to genuinely care and engage about energy?
Well, it's a very good question, Peter. And if you contrast, the UK consumer to the German consumer, the German consumer has a much greater appetite for a lot of microgeneration technologies such as yours, and that's partly because the feed-in tariffs have been higher, and that got everybody's attention. But also, I think there is a genuine interest in technology, and also the other limiting factor in the UK is actually people move house much more frequently here, on average about every 4.5, 5 years. And therefore, if you have a piece of technology that has a 10-year payout, you're not going to make that investment. So, I think there's a whole raft of different things we need to do. Now, if the Green Deal is applied to microgeneration, that will be a big help, because otherwise that investment is potentially stranded. But I think in terms of general awareness, and also I think making our appliances, and we've already been having some discussions about this, and you'll see some of the sort of smart meters downstairs, but making them sort of cooler is going to be part of the whole thing too, and making the Ceres fuel cell something that people have great pride in is also going to be very important.
Thank you. Sorry, there was a question there. Yes.
Hi, I'm Frances from the Energy Retail Association, and it's a question for Sam really. Halfway through your speech, you threw in something that I thought was quite exciting. And was it a £30 million kickoff of Green Deal?
Yep.
And I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure.
Should we just do a couple more questions? Sam?
Yep.
Why don't we take one of this lady up at the front, and there's the gentleman over there. Thank you.
Jessica Hodge from Islington Council. Given that people in the UK know more about climate change than almost anywhere else in Europe, but do the least to help combat it, do you think at some stage there's going to be a need to make building owners legally responsible for the energy efficiency of their buildings?
And yes, the gentleman here.
Dexter Galvin from the Carbon Disclosure Project. You spoke at length this evening about how to empower the domestic customer to improve their energy efficiency. I'm very interested, if you have large corporate clients, what you do to empower them to be more energy efficient.
Okay, great. Sam, why don't we do that? Why don't you start off with the large 30 million?
The 30 million. The 30 million is a sort of go early project on the Green Deal to actually, we will basically open a website to allow people to register. And there are complexities to this, which is why it requires legislation. But for the reasons I was talking about with microgeneration, but the same applies to insulation and installing boilers. At the moment, the whole concept of the Green Deal is that the customer is effectively the investment. We install the piece of technology or the piece of insulation, and the capital cost of that is recovered through savings on the bill. Now, the issue then is what happens if the customer wishes to switch suppliers, or what happens indeed if the customer wishes to sell their home and move house. What happens to that potentially stranded debt, and how do we recover that? And that's why legislation is required to actually ensure that that debt effectively attaches to the property, so that the new supplier or the new homeowner would effectively pick that up. And what we will be doing with the people who are on this £30 million pilot who register, and we will be starting this next year, is actually working through some of those issues. We will be installing insulation where effectively the customer has no cost and the saving is recovered through the bill. We'll be installing boilers, we'll be installing microgeneration and different technologies, and we'll be working through some of these practical teething questions such as the ones I've described, because the likelihood is that even if this gets into a white paper and into legislation next year, it won't actually become fully enacted until 2012, and we think there's a lot to be learnt in the meantime and want to take a leadership position in it.
Adair, do you want to discuss this issue of land and homeowner responsibility?
Well, I want to make a set of comments about the tools we use, which get to this point about regulating buildings. I think we have to recognise that one of the problems we still face, and it's a sort of good problem to face, is that for many people, energy is a pretty small cost. Now, Sam mentioned the figure that the extra cost on the energy bills would be £260 per year. I'm willing to bet that not everybody in this group, because I'm sure not everybody here is a relatively high income people, but there's a hell of a lot of people in this room today for whom 260 quid on their energy bill, spread out in terms of the quarter or monthly energy bills that they pay, won't change their behaviour, right? Because actually it's a pretty small part of their income. It's just not going to change their behaviour. And that is a simple fact. It's a big amount for people on low income, and we have a big issue about how we impose that cost and not have it significantly, as Sam said in his speech, regressive. But we have a problem that at middle and higher incomes, these costs are pretty trivial. We have the same problem, actually, in much of business, not in heavy energy intensive industry. If you're a steel mill, you care a hell of a lot about your energy cost. You'll focus on that energy cost. It'll be one of the key things you manage. And so if we move a price instrument like the carbon price, that can really change the technologies that people use. But if you thought about a bank or an insurance company or a retailer, what is energy cost as a percent of their total cost of production? 2 or 3%. So how much management attention does it get versus all the other things that management has to pay attention to? Well, relatively little. So what are then the instruments that we use on that? Well, price instruments can be effective. We can increase that price and we can make that price more aware to people. And one of the things we know in economics is that people don't just respond to the price going up, they respond if you make the price visible. People are not fully rational in their responses. If you can actually say, oh, pay attention to this, which is why within the carbon reduction commitment, which is the new tool being applied to commercial businesses and to the public sector, we're trying to make sure that the cost of energy is seen as a big lumpy amount, or the cost of carbon is seen as a big lumpy amount by the CFO of the entire corporate entity, and then it'll be aggregated enough that they'll say, well, that's something worth saving some money on, where if it's spread into lots and lots of separate operational managers, it won't get attention. So we can do that, but it does also mean that we sometimes have to use pure regulation. I think we know in buildings that in relation to the new housing stock, the clearest policy tool is just regulation. It's just how we build these houses, and we are committed to having zero housing for the new housing stock, and that is the most effective lever. It's much more effective than either awareness or a price. But the difficulty, as Sam said in his speech, is that our housing stock only turns over at about 2% per annum. So it's, you know, by 2100 or 2150, new building regulation will deliver a dramatically more efficient housing stock, but that's a long time to wait. So what are we going to do about the existing housing stock? We've got to, as much as possible, make it hassle-free, but I don't think we should exclude the possibility that at some stage we move to a more directive process and start basically saying, you have got to get your houses down to this level of energy efficiency, or if that is really difficult because there are constraints, because you're a listed house, you're in a conservation agency, you've got to make a financial contribution to offset. That is heading us towards the idea of individual carbon budgets, but I don't think we should exclude that. Having said that, awareness and information can make a lot of difference. I mean, let's take electrical appliances. The fact is that those things where you go into an electrical shop and it tells you the electrical appliance is A, B, or C, and then we get rid of the C's after a while and we have A plus 8, those have been quite effective in making people think, there is a more energy efficient or a less energy efficient fridge. Similarly, in cars, the process of telling people what the CO2 per kilometres are, this has made people who want to be responsible pay attention. So awareness and information can be powerful levers, which is why I think the smart meters are going to be very important contributions to that. But I think we will need to look at it over time, and we shouldn't necessarily exclude some strong regulatory levers at some stage.
Sam, we're running over a little bit, but I would like you just to answer that question about corporate clients, and also just to pick up on Adair's point. You made a very powerful point in the speech about the fact that £2 billion of the winter fuel payment is going to people who are not living in fuel or energy poverty. Could you talk just about your top clients and the ones who are in the most need?
I mean, if we look at, I think large corporate clients, and by that I mean sort of big industrial users who are not actually a big part of the British Gas customer base, because we tend to focus on sort of smaller commercial clients, but the very large ones I think are very energy savvy, and they understand the market, they understand the opportunities for energy efficiency, because for them, whether they're a chemical work or a steel works or a car plant, energy is a big part of their cost. But for the ones that Adair's describing, which is a big part of our commercial customer base and retailers and so forth, what we can do there, and we're increasingly doing, is providing them with much better quality information, so that, for instance, if you are a retailer with 100 sites in our bill now, we can actually tell them which sites are more energy efficient, where they're spending a lot on refrigeration, where they're spending a lot on lighting, and start to really give them higher quality information. And I think that actually is a big step forward and raises awareness, which I think is the key point. At the other end of the spectrum, I mean, the big question of the winter fuel payment, and obviously this is a very sensitive issue, but the reality is that when the winter fuel payment was originally introduced, it was intended to do as it's described and be a rebate off the energy bill for people who had real difficulty meeting their energy bills, and particularly the vulnerable customers for whom their energy bills were more than 10% of their income. Over time, it is, firstly, it never was a rebate off the energy bill. It was translated instead into a cash payment for people which they receive through the post, so it can be spent on anything rather than the energy bill. But then over time, it has also grown, both in numbers of people and in amount, and is not, therefore, as well targeted as it could be. And our analysis is that actually, if you took the sum, which is some 2.7 billion pounds, and applied it to the genuinely fuel poor, those in fuel poverty, i.e. those whose energy bills in excess of 10% of their disposable income, and we now have the systems to do that, and took it off their energy bills, then actually you would remove fuel poverty. Obviously, you would be depriving a section of middle-income earners of that annual payment, but we think that would be certainly a big way of dealing with some of the regressive impacts of decarbonisation.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry that we're not going to be able to take any more questions. Not for the first time. We've run a little bit over time, but I hope you will understand. As you can imagine, this is an extraordinarily important subject, but one of great complexity, and having the opportunity to hear Sam Laidlaw and Adair Turner talk with such detail about it has been fascinating for me. I'm sure it's been fascinating for you, and so I hope you'll join me in thanking them, and then join us downstairs for a drink in a moment.